I'm the last speaker, so a last man in row 5, but I'm from the European Commission, Erik Forsberg from DG CNECT. As you know, the digital DG, I think we should call it DG Digital instead, it would probably be better than Connect. Just saying that on the issue of gender, I think I would like to cite what the UN initiative Equals is saying about it. Their slogan is technology has no gender, and I think that says very much about what we are trying to achieve with gender balance also in this. Simply saying, I was asked to speak about the recent EU-Africa Business Forum, and in that context also, of course, the summit. I would just like to first of all recall a little bit of background to why digital was so prominent in this EU or this business forum. I think it has been like 2 or 3 years now when we started in DG CNECT to flirt with our friends in DG DevCo, telling them that digitalization is there and that 80% of the Africans actually have a smartphone, that we can do much about it. And you've heard from everybody around here how much it actually can do in development, in the development context. So I don't have to repeat all the goods of it. But this is what we tried to sell, that we sold the gospel to DG DevCo. I think also we got tremendous help from 2 places. First of all, the member states. The member states wrote a relatively harsh note to the European Commission saying, what are you doing? I mean, basically, you know, digitization is there, and now you have to start using it. The other part was, I think, inside the Commission, where you had my highest boss, Vice President Ansip, who caught up the interest and was very interested to bring forward this issue within the European Commission. He got also Vice President Mogherini with him, and of course eventually also Commissioner Mimica. And I must say also, as you know, recently I have also a new commissioner in NodeMitte, who is Maria Gabriel, and who is also extremely interested, as you know, in development issues, and who then is also following this very closely. So with good political backing, we in DG CNECT have been working with DG DevCo to take forward this issue. We came out with this, what we call a staff working document, which is basically an internal document within the Commission, but which says what we would like to do together. On digital development, and that staff working document, or that policy document, set up 4 priorities for us. The first one was, of course, promoting affordable and inclusive broadband for all in Africa, but elsewhere also, obviously, because the staff working document, I want to say the scope of this is predominantly Africa, but we say, of course, it's the rest of the developing world too. But first of all, Africa, because we think that there is the largest challenges. I mean, even though internet connectivity is growing quickly in Africa, Africa is very much lagging behind, and therefore, if you don't have internet, obviously everybody knows, if you don't have a digital or internet connectivity, it's difficult to also talk about digital. So the first thing is, of course, promoting broadband connectivity. Second point that we would like to also promote is digital skills. Of course, both in terms of literacy, but also real skills, coding, etc., etc. We put an emphasis, obviously, on the youth. The youth needs work and jobs in Africa, and this was actually the theme of this year's summit between the EU and Africa. But also on women, of course, because it's only by women actually taking its own, what would I say, faith in its work and start working strongly on actually getting the skills that are necessary, that we actually fulfill a number of things that we would like to do, including the Sustainable Development Goal 5, which talks about using ICT to empower women. The third point, which was pretty much also what we were doing, of course, in a business forum, was to promote and support digital entrepreneurship and the growth of digital entrepreneurship. So of course again here helping startups to scale ups, but also seeing to it that there is a level playing field for our own companies in Africa, and the African companies also have the opportunities to come to Europe and to develop. I think this is an area also where we do have a relatively a number of strong companies in Africa which are actually starting now to export also their knowledge and services to the European Union. So this is actually very, very positive, I think, and that shows the strength in this sector in Africa. The third one is, of course, this issue about mainstream digitalization into other sectors, other priority sectors of the European cooperation with Africa. So in governance, agriculture, health, financial services, energy and education, for just mentioning some of them. Okay, so this paper was then produced in May, and it was annexed to what was the Communication for Africa, which some of you might have seen, and it maybe was forgotten about certain people, but it was not forgotten by us nor by DigiDevCo. So when we were establishing and setting up the plans for the EU-Africa Business Forum, digitalization became one out of three, and I dare to say, with all false modesty, that digitalization became the big subject at the EU-Africa Business Forum this year. We brought 150 startups from Africa and from the European Union to mingle, to network, to come forward with, which in the end of the day became the Startup for Africa Manifesto, which is now online and which I hope everybody can have a look at. And I think it's also interesting for you to both look at it, but also to comment upon it, because it's a living document. This was actually very much without our involvement. And it was the Africans and the Europeans that sat down and wrote this document, which I think is extremely helpful. How do we actually support and go forward with a better connection between EU and African startups? The forum also had a number of workshops on, particularly in how to invest in startups. Of course, we need a lot of investment in startups in Africa. Also, what it had was, and that was very closely connected to the Startup for Africa, but I must thank anybody who is German here, because Germany was very helpful, helping us with the thing, and the Germans set up a digital youth lab, which came up with 10 very good suggestions also, actually, which we then later on brought into what was, I think, the major event from the Commission point of view, was a high-level roundtable on the digital economy, where we brought together in a multi-stakeholder format CEOs from European and African companies, a number of ministers from the African Union, member of the European Parliament. Mrs. McGavin was there, so that was also a good impetus from this house. And it was chaired by Vice President Ansip and by Commissioner Abu Zaid from the African Commission. That roundtable came out then later on with its declaration, which you will be able to find also on the internet relatively soon. We have saved this until the moment when we got also the general declaration from the EU-Africa Summit. Unfortunately, that has not been on the net yet, so we have not put this on the net yet. But as soon as we have that, we would like to put them together as to have a readable understanding of the two things, how it works together. Because this was all obviously the high-level panel, so there was 35 relatively, senior people, both women and men, I must say, around the table, and it was also then chaired by one woman and one man, the woman being African, which was good. But there we had, the outcome of that was obviously this, and this was the input to the summit also. of course, all the companies that were around the table here, I think, were there. I mean, Orange was of course also the one that brought forward to the summit the conclusions and the ideas coming out of the business forum. So Orange had a big role to play at that meeting, but also Nokia was there and a few others. I think it was a very interesting forum. What I wanted to say is also that from the high-level panel or the high-level roundtable, of course, the ideas that we've had are so general about skills, about connectivity, and about entrepreneurship. They were, of course, taken on board. Africa, the African Union, very strongly asked us to add also cybersecurity and privacy and data protection to the issues. I mean, I think that we can be proud in the European Union to have, I think the most advanced thinking in terms of privacy and personal data protection in the world. And the Africans are very interested to have a look at this. I think it's important that we actually support that and that we do it wholeheartedly, even though we have some governments, of course, in Africa, which is less democratic. But I think that is something that we have to overcome, and we have to work with it possibly to become more democratic and accountable. We normally say when we have this type of discussions that the alternatives is of course that the help for cybersecurity comes from a country far east, and that is probably not what any democratic country would like to see in Africa. So this is a situation. Of course, there was also in this one, I think there's a few other things that I would like to mention. For instance, promoting responsible business practices was also mentioned in English, so everybody agreed on that. And I think what was also a good outcome of the roundtable was the indication that we would like to set up a multi-stakeholder platform to cooperate in a multi-stakeholder manner between Africa and Europe, because as we know, digitalisation can only be done in Africa with the help of the private sector. And of course also with the support from civil society at large, I would say, is also extremely important. So this is what we are going to do now. So that's one of the outcomes that we have, something that we are now thinking about. This was SAP that came forward with it, the German company, from the good experience that they have had at home in Germany. And we are hopefully going to try to build on this, because I think this is really the most important way of bringing forward how to actually make it happen in Africa. Because we need to cooperate, we need the companies to roll out broadband, to set up all good devices and apps, etc., etc. But we also need of course, the public sector to first of all regulate in such a manner that it is conducive to all this process, but also obviously to fill in on the last mile of things where projects cannot be neither bankable nor are they interesting for the private sector. So I think this is a very important progress, and I think this is something that we need to do in the future. Now, where do we stand now in the coming period after this? Because I was asked also to comment upon that. Of course, digital is still the new kid on the block in the European foreign assistance or in the cooperation effort, or wherever we like to put it. It is something that we need to continue to work on quite heavily. If you look into the staff working document that I mentioned before, it has 2 annexes with concrete proposals on projects and flagships that we would like to do. In the context of the whole summit, there was also discussions about a number of flagships that we would like to bring forward. One of them being to support e-governance. Another one being supporting cross-border commerce, whether it is with data or pure e-commerce. There are other ideas also. Luxembourg has already been working very much to support exchange points in Africa, because of course traffic today goes via the European Union. So if you send something from, if you send an email from Ethiopia to South Sudan, it goes via London, which is probably not the most cost-efficient way. So we are working with Africa to actually build these points, and with that also concept, I think it's very important that we continue to work on content, helping the Africans to set up an African internet, which relates to the African problems. Africa for Africa, Africa for Africans, as they say themselves. I think that is a very important issue. I don't think we are the bad ones in this in the European Union, but I do think that we do have too many. I mean, we're too dominated by Silicon Valley, basically. And I think that is something that we can work together with Africa to make content more European in Europe, but also particularly African in Africa. If you look to the list, particularly the Annex 2 in this Start Working With, you can see that we are covering basically all the different priorities that we have. We would like to also support, of course, the empowerment of women in ICT. We would like to see too that we use ICT and ICT solutions to come to terms with the root causes of migration, obviously. I think sometimes I would like to say that in the future probably data will migrate to Africa, because there's where the manpower will be in the future, when we all grow old in the European Union. If we don't have more Africans coming to our countries, but that's another thing. Very politically wrong saying that, I suppose. So I think we have a big exchange. I think in the end of the day, what I just wanted to say was that Mogherini, Vice President High Representative Mogherini, said something which is very important: is that Africa and the European continent is really very much intertwined, and that we actually depend on well-being for both from one another. And I think this is actually the endeavor that we have in front of us, to actually see to it that the two continents can actually benefit from one another, and also to face the common challenge that we have in the future. Okay, I'll stop at that and be talking too much, but I'm happy to answer.